When darkness descends, the macabre dance of death begins. This isn't the start of a horror film, but rather a dive into real-life chilling stories of copycat killers. These are individuals who, driven by a twisted fascination, seek to replicate the horrific acts of infamous murderers. Let's delve into the murky depths of the human psyche to understand the motivation behind these chilling imitations. You see, the concept of copycat killers is as intriguing as it is terrifying. They're not original perpetrators, but rather they're dark reflections, distorted echoes of the original killers they idolize. Their motivations can range from a perverse sense of admiration, a desire for notoriety, or simply the thrill of the act itself. Now imagine the audacity it takes to mimic a well-known killer, to follow in their sinister footsteps, adopting their modus operandi, their signature style of inflicting terror. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Today we begin with our first chilling tale, that of an infamous original killer whose deeds sent tremors through society. This was a man who reveled in the macabre, who found sickening pleasure in his acts of violence. His motives were deeply rooted in his disturbed psyche, a tangled web of resentment, rage, and sadistic pleasure. His methods were brutal, his victims chosen with a cold, calculating precision. His name echoed through the annals of criminal history, striking fear in the hearts of many. Fast forward to a time when the original killer's deeds were but a terrifying memory, a new player steps into the scene. This copycat killer, driven by his twisted fascination, sought to replicate the original's reign of terror. But there's a catch. Imitation, they say, is the sincerest form of flattery. But in the world of crime, it's a different story. But not all can master the art of imitation. As we'll see, our first copycat killer fell far short of their gruesome inspiration. Our first copycat killer attempted to mirror the infamous actions of their predecessor. This is the chilling tale of a man who sought to emulate the notorious Weaver of Shadows, a serial killer known for his intricate designs woven with victims' hair at the crime scenes, a macabre signature that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to look. The copycat, known as the Shadow Weaver, attempted to replicate this horrifying hallmark, but the imitation fell far short of the original. Where the Weaver of Shadows had a meticulous and morbid artistry, the Shadow Weaver showed a lack of patience and precision. His designs were haphazard, clumsy, a crude mockery of the original's grim elegance. Moreover, the Weaver of Shadows was known for his chilling patience, his victims disappearing only to be found weeks later, their hair woven into the sinister tapestries. The Shadow Weaver, on the other hand, seemed to lack this patience. His victims were found within days, their hair hastily woven, the design barely recognizable. And then there was the choice of victims. The original focused on a specific demographic, creating a pattern that made his crimes all the more terrifying. The copycat, however, lacked this consistency. His victims ranged from the young to the old, male and female, with no discernible pattern or reasoning. Perhaps most telling was the lack of fear the Shadow Weaver inspired. While the Weaver of Shadows had an entire city living in terror, his copycat succeeded only in creating confusion and disgust. The intricate designs that once symbolized a horrifying predator now represented a failed imitation. It was these glaring differences that led to the Shadow Weaver's capture. His lack of precision, patience, and planning made him an easy target for law enforcement, and so his reign of terror ended, not with a bang, but with a whimper. An imitation is only as good as its original. Our next case is yet another example of a horrifyingly poor copy. Our second copycat killer tried to follow in the footsteps of a notorious murderer. The original, known as the Phantom of the Night, was a master of manipulation, using psychological tactics to terrorize his victims before his deadly strike. This killer was methodical, leaving no traces behind, with each crime scene meticulously cleaned to avoid detection. His reign of terror lasted for over a decade, making him one of the most feared serial killers of his time. The copycat, however, was a stark contrast to the original. Instead of the Phantom's chillingly calculated approach, our imitation artist seemed almost haphazard in his attempts. His first crime scene was a mess, littered with evidence. Fingerprints were found on the door handle, and footprints were imprinted on the carpet. Where the Phantom was a ghost, this copycat was more akin to a bull in a china shop. Moreover, the copycat lacked the psychological finesse of the original. Instead of inducing fear and anticipation in his victims, he often rushed into his crimes, leaving his victims confused rather than terrified. This lack of planning and execution not only failed to recreate the Phantom's infamous terror, but also led to his swift capture. Despite his attempts to imitate the Phantom's notorious crimes, the copycat's lack of understanding of the original killer's methods led to his downfall. The differences between them were stark, and it was these differences that ultimately led to the copycat's capture. His failed attempts to recreate the Phantom's reign of terror only served to highlight his lack of skill and understanding. Before we reveal our next case, take a moment to subscribe, follow, like, comment, and share our videos. Your support helps us bring you more chilling tales like these. The third copycat killer we're exploring today sought to replicate a chilling series of crimes. This individual, whose name we'll withhold for the sake of discretion, attempted to emulate the infamous Silent Stalker, a killer who terrorized a small town in the early 90s. The original Silent Stalker was known for his horrifyingly meticulous planning. He would stalk his victims for weeks on end, learning their routines, their habits, their fears. By the time he made his move, he knew them better than they knew themselves. He was never caught, his identity remaining as elusive as a shadow in the night. In contrast, our copycat lacked the patience and cunning that defined the Silent Stalker. He hastily selected his victims, barely taking the time to understand their lives. His lack of preparation was glaringly obvious, leading to his capture after just 2 attempts. The Silent Stalker was known for his chilling calling card, a single black feather left at each crime scene. Our copycat, in his misguided attempt to replicate this, left a handful of common pigeon feathers. Far from instilling fear, it only served to highlight the absurdity of his imitation. The original Silent Stalker was a master of stealth. He would enter and exit his victims' homes without a trace, like a ghost in the night. The copycat, however, was clumsy and loud. His attempts at stealth were laughable at best, leading to his swift capture. The Silent Stalker was a terrifying figure, his crimes a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. The copycat, on the other hand, was a pathetic figure, his attempts at imitation highlighting his inadequacy rather than his menace. Even the most gruesome acts of violence can't be replicated exactly. Our next case proves just that. The twisted mirror image of the Silent Stalker is a testament to the fact that even in the world of crime, originality cannot be faked. It's a chilling reminder that while imitation may be the sincerest form of flattery, in the world of crime, it's a recipe for disaster. Our final case involves a copycat killer who tried to recreate a macabre masterpiece of murder. In the shadowy underworld of serial killers, few names are as infamous as that of the original Night Stalker. Known for his chillingly meticulous planning and execution, the Night Stalker would often leave his victims in a state of paralyzing fear before carrying out his heinous acts. His reign of terror spanned a decade, leaving a trail of horror that few could forget. Enter our copycat, a man who fancied himself the new Night Stalker. Armed with a superficial understanding of the original killer's methods, he set out to mimic his idol's reign of terror. But as we'll soon see, his attempts were more of a tragic farce than a terrifying spectacle. Where the original Night Stalker was methodical and precise, our copycat was impulsive and sloppy. Instead of stalking his victims for days to learn their routines, he would often choose his victims at random. This lack of planning made him easy to track and easier to catch. The original Night Stalker was known for his chillingly calm demeanor, even under immense pressure. Our copycat, on the other hand, was easily agitated, often leaving his would-be victims unharmed when his plans didn't go as expected. Perhaps the most telling difference between the two was their motivations. The original Night Stalker was driven by a deep-seated need to control and dominate his victims. Our copycat, however, seemed to be more interested in the notoriety that came with being a serial killer than in the act itself. This desire for fame ultimately led to his downfall, as he was caught bragging about his crimes to a friend. As we've seen, even the darkest of deeds can't be copied perfectly. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey. Remember, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Or is it? Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.